Alright, welcome. So this video is going to go over the steps required to convert an existing SN95 GT V6 rear disc brake setup over to a Cobra rear disc brake setup. Now this will apply mostly to SN95 cars, but it will also apply to Fox body cars that have already been converted to SN95 GT V6 rear brakes. So let's go through some of the parts you're going to need to do this conversion. Now, this is essentially what you get if you order the Ford M2300M kit. And this will get most of what you need in order to convert an SN95 GT brake system over to Cobra brakes. What you're going to get with that kit is your rotor. You're going to get your axle bracket, in which bolts, these four bolts bolt to the actual flange on the 8.8 axle. You're going to get an anti-moan brace, which may or may not be needed. Some folks experience some groaning noise when reversing without that. So you can try the setup without that particular bracket. But if you notice noise, you'll want to get that bracket and add that on. The only hardware that the kit comes with are these three bolts that are used to attach the dust shield to the axle bracket here. Now the dust shield and these three bolts are exactly identical to what is on the GT V6. Now these axle brackets are not available separate in the OE cast iron form unless you buy the M2300M kit. There are aftermarket versions of these out there that are made out of aluminum all over eBay pretty cheaply. But if you want a set of the original ones in the cast iron, you're pretty much stuck looking on eBay for used ones or buying the Ford kit that has them. The actual part number that is stamped on there is actually the same between both brackets. Ford put an X for the particular digit that were changed between the two of them. But the way to differentiate it between the GT and the Cobra is that the suffix at the end on the Cobra is BA. Meanwhile, on the GT, it's hard to see there, but it's actually AD. Same initial part number in the beginning, but it's AD. As you can see, when these get a little rusty, like this one, it's hard to see. But really, the best way to tell them apart is by looking in this particular view here. You can see that the extra length for the offset here on the Cobra brackets. So in addition to the parts that come with the M2300M kit, you're also going to need your caliper pad support bracket, in which the pads actually sit here. Now this is different from the GT. I have a different video that goes into those particular reasons, but you need to get your hands on one. You can either find a used set of OEM brackets, or you can go ahead and track down a Cardone 14-1042 bracket, which you'll get this, you get a brand new version of these. And then in addition to that, you need yourself a set of pads. So if you're sourcing the parts individually without the kit, this is really the bare minimum of what you need here. Bracket, anti-moan brace, maybe, caliper bracket, new set of pads, and a rotor. And here is a side-by-side comparison of the parts. We have your GT parts here on the right and your Cobra parts on the left. All right, so now that you've seen some of the differences in parts and have seen what parts are actually required, let's go ahead and install this on the car. Now the first step you're going to want to do is locate the fill port on the driver's side of the rear differential. It's on the upper side, just above this particular weight here. The fill port will look like this. It will accept the standard end of a 3/8 ratchet. You're going to want to stick a ratchet in there and gently loosen that without stripping it, because you always want to make sure you have a way to fill your differential before you actually drain it. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is go around and remove all the bolts holding your differential cover on. For my 2000, the original bolts here are 13 millimeter. Yours may vary. Now once you have all the bolts out, you want to take a screwdriver. You want to have your drain pan handy, like I do here. Come in from bottom and start prying this away. Shouldn't take very much to get that cover out and let that lovely fluid drain in. So next what you're going to do is you want to spin the rear end around to expose this bolt here, which you're going to remove there. Now I have the rear end on jack stands here, so I'm going to take this tire off shortly. But leaving the tire on gives me the ability to spin it to where I need. I'm going to remove this bolt, and then I'm going to push the cross pin out. I may need to spin the differential to remove the cross pin. Using a 15/16 socket, remove the center pin. So once you have the pin pulled out, you want to see if you can push this pin in just a little bit, about an inch or so. And then what I do is use a pry bar in the axle, see if you can rotate that around. And get it to roughly this position. You want to see if you can pull the pin up to the top. It's going to be very slick, so you may want to use a rag. And just like that, out it comes. Now in this position, once the pin is out, you want to avoid spinning the rear wheels in a way that both of them don't spin together. You want to keep them together because otherwise you run the risk of these spider gears popping out. So if you notice where I spun the differential with the pin up, I still have perfect access to the C-clips to be able to pull those out. So this should work for me without having to spin the differential at all. Now before we can push the axle in, there's a few things we need to do. We need to take the caliper off, and we also need to take the ABS wheel sensor off. Depending on your caliper's original or aftermarket, these bolts here will be 13 millimeter. Next up, we'll use a 15 millimeter to remove the two bolts holding the caliper bracket to the axle bracket. You can leave the pads on for now, as it won't matter in the removal. After that, the rotor can come off as well. At this point, you can also use your 8 millimeter to get rid of the dust shield as well. There are 3 bolts, 1, 2, and 1 more on the bottom. For ABS cars, you'll see here that you're unable to push the axles in until you remove the ABS wheel sensor. I was able to use a 1/4 inch wrench to get on the special head for the ABS wheel sensor. It seemed to bite well enough for me to remove. Once the ABS wheel sensor is out of the way, you can push the axle in as far as it'll go. Now these sensors, in my case, did seize in there. As you can see, I wasn't able to get in and out in one piece, unfortunately. So you got to be very careful when you go to remove that. But once you get those out of the way, push the axle in as far as it'll go. At that point, we can go and see if we can get the C-clip out. Now from this vantage point, you might be able to see the C-clip there. So what you're going to want to do is see if you can, I'm using a little magnet here. See if I can grab that and spin it around. You may have to manipulate the axle in and out just a little bit to where there's no tension on it, to spin that around to remove it. Okay, what I ended up doing was actually spinning the C-clip around and pushing it off outward. And then from there I'm able to push the axle, and the C-clip actually fell down. See if I can recover it. And here it is. At that point, you can go ahead and carefully pull the axle out. Now I'm also going to be changing my seals and bearings. So as I get to the end here, I'm going to kind of lever this way and pop this seal out. To remove the axle bracket, it's a 14 millimeter on both sides. To remove the anti-moan bracket, use a 13 millimeter. Once you remove the two 13 millimeter nuts, the anti-moan bracket should come right off. And then the bracket will just simply slide right off. Now to install our new bearings, I'm going to simply slide it into place here. And then we're going to use a bearing driver, a dead blow, to to push it into place. So installation will be the reverse, as you can imagine here. So you want to make sure you have the right bracket. These are marked R on the left. So since I'm working on the passenger side at the moment, I'm going to use the R bracket. I'm going to reinstall them with the bolts to the rear. I'm just going to pick one just to get it started. And then start the nut, and then I'm going to go around and just tighten these all up here. This is going to be a 14 millimeter on both sides. Now you don't want to put the ABS wheel sensor in until you get the axle in. You can go ahead and reinstall your axle after this bracket has been bolted on. Push it in as far as it'll go, and then you can reinstall your C-clip. So with the axle pushed in, we can take our C-clip, which I'm going to use a brand new one, push that into place. And then if you can, you want to pull the axle out, and it should drop into a pocket. Once you're at that point there, you are good to go. At this point, you can go ahead and slip on one of your new Cobra rotors. You can take a stack of 1/2-inch ID washers, and you can use a lug nut to kind of spin the rotor, spin the washers down, tighten this up, and that'll lock the rotor on. So in this case, I'm just going to use 2 of them, 2 sets with some washers. So we're going to go ahead and put the pad bracket on with the pads, and then we'll bolt the caliper back on, connect the parking brake, and then we're done on this side. Next up, we're going to want to install the pads into the Cobra specific pad bracket. So we want to install these clips that come with your pads on the actual pad themselves. Now sometimes there is a little finger in here that doesn't have enough tension. So you may have to use a screwdriver and come in and just bend the tab just a little bit forward there, so that when you install it on the pad, it has enough tension to stay on there. So that one works pretty good. These ones are untouched, and as you can see, they fall off. So we're just going to put a little bit more tension on them. Once all the clips are installed, we're going to test fit the pad into the actual bracket. You just want to make sure they can freely move back and forth. If you're good with that, you're going to want to go ahead, get some caliper grease, take the pads out, apply some grease to each of these fittings, and reassemble. And that's how your assembled pad bracket should look. You want to make sure that you have the pads backed off enough just so you can slip it over the rotor. Back on the car, we're going to slip the bracket over the rotor, and we're going to align it with both the anti-moan brace and the actual axle bracket. Once in place, you're going to take your 15 millimeter and you're going to tighten that back down. Once your caliper bracket bolts are fully secured, come in with your 13 millimeter. You're going to want to tighten up your anti-moan bracket. So the final step we're going to do here is we're going to reattach the caliper back to the bracket here. Now, depending on how worn your pads are, you're going to want to get a caliper tool and spin the piston back in. Then you're going to apply new caliper grease to the piston and to the back side of the outer edge of the caliper. And then once you get that all set, you're going to want to use your wrench of choice. In my case, with my bolts that are on here, is a 14 millimeter to tighten the caliper up. Now we're going to go ahead and attach the parking brake cable. All right, so managed to get the parking brake cable on. What I had to do, since on the GT the cable is a little further forward, is I had to come back here and loosen this bolt here holding the cable, as well as loosen that to pull a little slack forward. After that point, I was able to seat the cable, install the E-clip, and then wrestle that over the pawl. And that concludes this side. So we're going to go around and make sure everything is tightened up properly. And the other side is going to be pretty much the exact same procedure, so I'm not going to show that. But I'm going to skip ahead like we've done the other side. I'm going to show how to put the pumpkin back together and refill the differential fluid. So what I've done here now is I've inserted the pin and spun the differential around. I actually pushed it past it. Push it in fully now, and then I can kind of make an alignment tweak here to fully line that up. That way when I come back in here and install the pin, everything fits nice. Now I know most people tend to reuse their differential center pin bolt, but I'm going to go ahead and replace mine. It has some abnormal wear on the sides here, and these have been prone to snap. So I'm going to go ahead and change this out. Part number M2441-1. I'm going to go ahead and take our new bolt, insert it a little bit just to get the seat. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and torque that down. Now for reinstalling the differential cover, a lot of people just use RTV. But I'm going to use one of these lube blocker gaskets. I've used this on my Fox body. I've had the differential cover on and off a couple times with the same gasket, and it's not leaking at all, so I'm kind of impressed with this. I'm going to go ahead and use this gasket here on this install. And I'm using a 13 millimeter wrench. Go ahead and reinstall all the bolts. The final step is to get 2 quarts of whatever gear oil you choose and get a fluid transfer pump. You're going to remove the fill plug that we loosened as the first step here, and you're going to pump 2 quarts in, whatever way works for you.